Every person has got a light. Every person has got a light. Look with your heart, see how bright. Every person has got a light, has got a light. Every bird's got a song to sing. Every bird's got a song to sing. Whether grounded or taking wing, every bird's got a song to sing. It's got a song to sing. Every tree takes time to grow. Every tree takes time to grow. If you want a forest, then you should know. Every tree takes time to grow, takes time to grow. Every person's got a song to sing. Every person's got a song to sing. Whether grounded or taking wing, every person's got a song to sing. It's got a song to sing.
And Rosie in their beautiful Ukrainian blouses. I think it's a great image for us to reflect on creativity today. Creativity as a root of joy. And I want to speak a little bit to some of the ways that I experienced Rosie personally as someone who inspires creativity in others. And maybe I can speak to that for a few moments, but then to go on and think about how that was true for Rosie and Xenia. So I think we've heard a little bit about Rosie in past weeks. I know Mary talked about Rosie last week. Mary Bastido talked about welcoming Rosie at the day program years ago. And I know we talked about Rosie remembering her around her birthday in February, and just remembering what a powerful woman Rosie was, who had such a deep impact on the people around her. And I know that even when you consider our leadership team today, Agnieszka was someone who was formed by Rosie at the new house, and Tanya was formed by Rosie at the day program. And yeah, Clara is someone who was very formed by Rosie, and me too. So I was thinking of just three qualities, three things that help to foster creativity. And these were three things that Rosie shared in abundance when you got to know her. Number one was a sense of being anchored in ourselves. I think any artist needs to have, anyone who's creative, I think that needs to come from somewhere from a deep place of being rooted in yourself. And Rosie was someone who had just sort of a deep confidence that when you watched it in her, when you watched her just sort of exercise her personality and her individuality, when you were around that long enough, it kind of rubbed off on you, and it kind of gave you a bit of confidence to be rooted in yourself too. And those of us who knew Rosie, you can imagine the way she walked around, and she would often sort of lean to one side, because that's kind of how her spine was. That's how her back was. So even when she would stand up and walk, she would sort of be leaning over to the one side. And when she walked, her steps were kind of uneven. And so she would you'd watch her take her steps and walk along, and she would often kind of circle around and hover before she landed somewhere. And often there was a big beanbag chair, and she would sort of make her way over to the beanbag, and she'd hover above it for a minute. And then she would just kind of tip back and just land on the beanbag. And there was just this beautiful sense when you were watching that she just had this deep sense of self, that sort of the kind of thing that lets you sort of, walk around freely and hover, and then just plop yourself down without even looking behind you, just because you know that you're going to fall in the right place. So being anchored in ourselves, that's one thing. Another thing that I think is really important for creativity is risk-taking. So on the one hand, it's this deep sense of being anchored in ourselves, but then there's this other dimension of being willing to take risks. We need that to be creative, right? Creativity means we have to be able to try new things, right? And Rosie was a risk taker. She was a real risk taker. Whether or not it was in her walking around, she loved to ride a bike. She rode a bike, and when the weather was nice, she would ride her bike from the day program, from the meeting hall to the new house next door. That was her commute. That was one of her commitments. Is she would put on her bike helmet, and someone would come behind her, and she would bike to and from the meeting hall from the new house. She would also often climb on things. She would really reach for things and climb for things, especially things in the kitchen that were a bit beyond her reach. And she would stand on her tiptoes and reach for that bread cupboard in the new house. And it was always quite astonishing how someone who was so petite could reach up so high. And another, she loved horseback riding, which I don't know about you, but that's something of a risk that I don't go around taking, but Rosie loved getting on a horse. And one of the biggest examples of her risk taking was trampolining. And she would go trampolining at the day program. And I remember especially hearing about this from Steve Mosier and from Tomek, a couple of Rosie's dear old friends, Tim Greenwood, Clara's Tim. They would go trampolining with Rosie, and at a trampoline place. And Rosie absolutely loved the bouncing and going flying in the air. And I don't know about you, but that's a little risky for me. But I think it's a wonderful example of just Rosie had that spirit where she just, didn't mind taking risks. She was anchored in herself. She was a risk taker. And then there was also, I want to say, a third quality of, we could call it spontaneity. We could call it being wacky or zany or thinking outside the box, but just creating a space for to really be in the moment and allow something new to emerge. That's a really important quality of creativity. Just to be wacky, spontaneous, fun, to have a sense of humor, and just to see what happens. So being anchored, taking risks, and being spontaneous. So those are three qualities of creativity that I think Rosie was able to share and inspire people around her. So if you look at this beautiful photo of Rosie with Xenia, those who have been around Daybreak for many years will know this story, but maybe those of us who have been part of Daybreak more recently, maybe we don't know this part. Xenia was a concert pianist. She was a concert pianist, which means she was a professional musician. And if you can think of how much practicing it would take, a lifetime of hours and hours and hours every single day of practicing the piano to become a professional concert pianist. Now that is a very creative thing to be able to do. Can you think of all the music that came out of Xenia's fingers and all of the people who would be inspired by her music? When Xenia came to Daybreak, she entered into relationship with Rosie, and Rosie just captivated her. And in all of the ways that we've just talked about, Rosie pulled Xenia into relationship. And I think if you hear Xenia talk about her relationship with Rose, she would tell you she learned something about being anchored in herself in a very deep way. She learned something about taking risks, and she learned something about being spontaneous and wacky. And after years of this formation, this teaching from Rosie, Xenia felt inspired to take a risk and to try to do something new. And that meant going very, very far away to Ukraine, where Xenia had family roots, going to Ukraine and trying to see if she could stir some creativity and see what might be born there in the spirit of L'Arche. And so Xenia, rooted in her relationship with Rosie and inspired to creativity, Xenia went to Ukraine and began to call families together and to stir and build a community. And so Faith and Light and L'Arche in Ukraine, two L'Arche communities that are there today, came out of the creativity between Xenia and Rosie. And Xenia often credited Rosie as being sort of a co-founder with her in Ukraine. And I think this photo might actually be from a beautiful once-in-a-lifetime trip that Ann P. and Mary Egan and Rosie actually went to Ukraine at one point, and were told that Rosie was received like royalty by folks in Ukraine because Xenia had talked about her for years and years. So if you think about that beautiful, beautiful friendship that got lived out in these small ways in the new house and day program, think of that, all the way around the world. L'Arche and Faith and Light in Ukraine today grew out of that creativity. So we thought that we might share this morning just a little film from L'Arche in Ukraine. And maybe some of you have seen it before, or maybe like me, maybe saw it a long time ago. But I went looking for it again recently just because I wanted to see it again, because we're thinking about Ukraine a lot in the news these days. And yeah, we thought that would just be a beautiful way for our community to join together today in solidarity with our friends in Faith and Light and L'Arche in Ukraine. So let's ask Clara to play that for us, Bogdan's story.
Я втомився від того, що нас загарбали. Кожен молиться, щоб наші солдати повернулися додому. Щоб наші діти не залишалися без сім'ї. Ми хочемо спокою. Ми хочемо сіяти пшеницю і інше зерно. Мати бджіл і мати мед. Немає багато шляхів боротися з війною без того, щоб не носити каміння в душі. Ви навіть можете померти від злості. Я не помру зі злості. Я вам покажу, як я виживаю. Кожного дня я випускаю моїх птахів політати по хаті. В роботі я лоскочу людей з любов'ю. Я вітаюся тільки тими людьми, які є милі мені. Я не хочу, щоб мене не звали пан Богдан. Я хочу, щоб мені казав просто Богдан. Кожного року я відвідав свого вуйка в Карпатах. Тому що мої ноги звикли до рівної місцевості. Ви кажете, я маю право злоститися, але я не хочу. Але для цього я повинен носити каміння на душі. Совєтські часи були тяжкими. Якщо ти борешся і маєш багато зла, ти можеш забути, як дихати свіжим повітрям. Як мати на руках свого племінника. Як кинути друга в сніг і дивитися, як червоніють його щоки, як помідор. Я можу померти один чудовий день, але не від злості. Але без каміння моїй душі.
You shall go out with joy and be led forth with peace. The mountains and the hills will break forth before you. There'll be shouts of joy, and all the trees of the fields will clap their hands. And all the trees of the fields will clap their hands. The trees of the fields will clap their hands. The trees of the fields will clap their hands as you go out in joy. You shall go out with joy and be led forth in peace. The mountains and the hills will break forth before you. There'll be shouts of joy, and all the trees of the fields will clap their hands. And all the trees of the fields will clap their hands. The trees of the fields will clap their hands. The trees of the fields will clap their hands as you go out in joy. Let's speed it up a little bit. Here we go. You shall go out with joy and be led forth in peace. The mountains and the hills will break forth before you. There'll be shouts of joy, and all the trees of the fields will clap their hands. And all the trees of the fields will clap their hands. The trees